저번주왕 방송입니다.
Okay, so welcome to the new Pioneer podcast. I am Gareth Johnson, the founder of YPT, and I'm going to be leading a series of wonderful podcasts where we interview interesting travel people, be they from the world of sport, politics, or even movies, which leads me to today's guest, Mr. Justin Martell. Hello, Justin. How are you today?
Oh, Gareth, I'm doing well, and greetings from New York City.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I forgot to add one little disclaimer in just now. During these times of coronavirus, you cannot pick where you podcast from. So despite it being Sunday morning in very sunny Cambodia, they are now decided to do building work next to my house. So I apologize if there is any noise interruption. So, welcome, Justin, from New York. Would you like to give us a little introduction to yourself?
Sure. I'm Justin Martell. I work in film, TV, and music here in New York City, and also have done a bit of writing. I don't know, kind of been all over the place in terms of I've done everything from low-budget B-flick horror movies to doing documentary film work for YPT in North Korea to I wrote a biography on the entertainer Tiny Tim. So I do a little bit of everything.
So overall, you're quite an interesting chap then. How old are you, if we may ask?
I'm 33 years old.
So you've managed to fit quite a bit into those 33 years by the sounds of things.
Well, yes, in the YPT tradition, in the tradition of the YPT lifestyle, yes.
I think so. Well, we'll definitely talk more about the YPT lifestyle and ethos later. But so I want to think for our listeners, how do we know each other? How does a working class Londoner like myself meet a writer and movie producer such as yourself?
Well, it's kind of an interesting story, I would say. But I first went to the DPRK in 2015. And like most Americans, I had an interest in North Korea. I would say at first from a very looking at North Korea through the traditional way that Americans might look at North Korea as a very strange and messed up place and a scary place. But actually, I here in New York City, I met a gentleman named Joe Terwilliger. And he is also, speaking of really interesting people, and I hope we can get him on the podcast, he had the distinction of being Dennis Rodman's translator on Dennis Rodman's trips to North Korea when they met with Marshal Kim Jong-un. And I met him at a bar and started talking to him. And I of course led into it with, what you would say as an American, like, well, what about the prison camps? What about the human rights abuses? What about the nukes? All that stuff. And he just had a kind of a much more neutral and measured opinion on everything. And something that somebody who's actually been to the DPRK and met the people there and talked with people on the ground there, would say. And of course, he wasn't saying that it was the workers' paradise as it portrays itself, but he, of course, portrayed it as much more gray than a black and white issue. And he just said, you should go. You should, and he encouraged me to do it. And that's at the point where I said I would really like to do this. Flash forward to 2015, I'm standing in Kim Il-sung Stadium in April of 2015, watching and filming the Pyongyang Marathon. And I was at that time working with another American-based travel company that does tours to the DPRK, and I actually just remember standing at Kim Il Sung, and everybody on that tour was fun. I met some really nice people, and it was very fun. But I remember standing and sort of seeing the YPT crowd, which was a younger crowd, I would say. And when I saw the crowd, when we got back to the Angakto Hotel, I saw that crowd in the bar, and it just seemed a little bit more my style. And I was like, I got to get with these guys. So when I came back from that trip to the DPRK, I was like, like a lot of people do, I was totally North Korea obsessed. Started watching North Korean movies, listening to North Korean music, just reading every book I could, whether it was positive, negative, or in between. And eventually that led me to I wanted to do some projects. As I mentioned, I work in music. I have a record label called Ship to Shore Phonoco, and I really wanted to put out some DPRK pop songs on vinyl, kind of the ultimate hipster North Korean experience.
Indeed.
And indeed. And actually we're now in 2021, that is going to happen. It's a little different than I originally envisioned, but I think we can get into that on the podcast as well.
Yes, exactly.
But the company that I had been working with really wasn't up for exploring those types of things. So I had been I had face stalked you, Gareth, a little bit, and I was aware of who you were and what YPT was. And I think I sent you the cheeky friend request, and soon thereafter we had a phone call. And the rest is history.
The rest is indeed history. Yes, I do remember that phone call, and I remember the cheeky Facebook request. So it sounds like we'll get a bit onto it more later. It sounds like North Korea had a really profound effect on your views on travel.
Well, you did. I mean, it was just like I guess it was one of those things that I wasn't really, I had been to Europe and things like that, prior to making that first trip to DPRK. But I guess when I made my second trip to DPRK, this time with Young Pioneer Tours, when I did the Real Deal Tour, which delivered everything it promised, I just just from talking to you guys and hearing the amount of countries that you guys had been to, and especially places that were considered, I guess, sort of taboo or do not travel or forbidden places. And it was like, yeah, this is something I want to get into and experience more. And hopefully there are ways that I can merge that with what I do with filmmaking and film and stuff. So certainly you did.
Wonderful. So you've mentioned the amount of countries that we go to. So it's inevitable that we get to the pissing contest. Obviously, it's not a contest, but I've been to 156, by the way. But how many countries have you been to?
Now it's about 50, and it would have been, I think this year I would have hit significantly more, but I don't think anybody or very few people were able to add to their list very much this year. Although I think you said you managed to nab 4 new countries, right? In 2020,
I managed to nab 4 new countries, and I think you must have done because we were together.
Oh, that's right. In January 2020, we were together. Yes. So I guess I got those same ones. So
you've got, in January, I think you would have Tonga, Samoa, American Samoa. Yes, it does count. That's at least 3. Was Australia new for you?
Yeah, Australia was new for me. Yeah.
Okay, so you managed to get 4 new countries as well this year, which is quite impressive. Okay, so let's not dwell on coronavirus because nobody's here to listen to that. But what was the number one place in 2020 that had coronavirus not happened, you would have ended up at?
Let's see. What did we have planned? I think we had planned that I was going to go to Turkmenistan. So that was part of that plan. Certainly, I was all set to go on the Kurdistan New Year's tour, but then we had that lovely new strain of coronavirus in the UK, which put the kibosh on that. But luckily, I believe it's been rescheduled for March. So yeah, that was it. I mean, honestly, I didn't do too much planning, only because it was kind of, we set up Turkmenistan, we set up Kurdistan, just crossing our fingers that the situation would change. And it didn't, but here's the hoping for 2021.
So, was you planning to do anything interesting in Tuvalu last year?
Yeah, actually, we had had a great time passing through Tuvalu at the end of 2019 when the two of us were leading YPT's least visited country tour together. And I think we had made plans to spend a month in Tuvalu where we were going to write the ultimate Tuvalu travel guide.
We were. So one day there will be tuvaluguide.com, but not just yet. Okay, so obviously we've garnered that you're a very keen traveller, that you've got very few inhibitions when it comes to travel. Do you come from a travelling background? Like, did your family take you travelling when you were young? When was your first trip abroad? All that kind of jazz.
Yeah, so actually my mother was, and actually still is, a travel agent. Obviously that industry has changed quite a bit from when I was a kid and what she did then, what she does now. When I was a kid, she did a lot of personal travel for people in sort of the pre-internet age, and now these days it's mostly corporate travel. So as a kid, we did, I guess by YPT standards, what you would consider very conventional trips. When I was a kid, we went to London, we went to Ireland, we went to France, we went to the Cayman Islands. My uncle got married in St. Croix. We went to Cozumel in Mexico. So I would say we went to Canada. So I would say, traditional tourist destinations. And it was really only that. And I never really, obviously I was always interested in other places and places that might seem sort of off the beaten track, but never really thought about going there until I got involved with YPT and just realized that, it was pretty easy to do if you wanted to do it.
Yes. I didn't realize you'd been to the Cayman Islands. I'm sure you have told me before, but as you may know, I used to live there. Do you know when you went there?
I was really little, so I really wouldn't have much to say. I just remember my mother swimming with stingrays and flipping out when a stingray crawled up her back.
Okay, yeah. So good old famous Stingray City, yes. I remember there very well. So this is a very hard one to answer, I think. But of everything you've done so far, what would you put as your best travel experience?
Well, it's really, I would say that's a tough one. Because it's also the question of what was I doing? Was I working? Was I just traveling? Etc. I mean, obviously, I think a lot of people involved with YPT, there is that just affinity for and interest in the DPRK.
Yeah.
So those were some of I would say, the trips that stuck with me the most. Also, just as a general experience, I had the opportunity to work with YPT and live on the North Korea-Chinese border because I lived in Dandong for a few months and worked there. And that was just an amazing place to work and live. I mean, it was a small city by Chinese standards, but still 5 million people. Not a lot of people spoke English, but it was the place, again, the biggest trading center for North Korea and China. So it was just an amazing mix of the two cultures with the Koreans and Chinese. And, obviously for Chinese, seeing North Koreans walking on the streets or North Korean run businesses or restaurants is not exactly unusual or taboo. So it was just really interesting as an American to live there and actually just see in China North Koreans walking around doing business with their leader badges on, being able just to on a Tuesday evening if I wanted to go and have a dinner at a North Korean run restaurant with a performance, and also just to North Korea watch from across the Yalu River, and kind of like, see things that were going on the other side, and, sort of, what are they doing over there? So yeah, that was, I think that was, in terms of just like general living, that was the most interesting experience. In terms of working, I would say one of the most interesting things was what we did together last summer, which was the feature film that we shot together in Albania, Castle Freak. That was probably the most interesting work experience.
Yes, that was certainly an interesting work experience. I think I would agree with you, and I think certainly about North Korea, that for almost all of us, again, when people ask me my best travel experience, I think the first one or two times going to North Korea certainly takes some beating.
If we just, only because we, I'm affiliated with YPT, and, we're friends. So I would say this is a little less formal than your casual interview. Maybe just since this is the first episode, I should ask you a few questions.
Okay.
And because you introduced yourself, obviously, founder of YPT. How did you come to found YPT? Like, how did you go from England to the Cayman Islands? How does that get us to North Korea?
Well, so I took a gap year from university, and I'm still on it. So that went well. So I was doing a number of very, very menial jobs in England and not doing very much with my life. So then when I was 21, me and my girlfriend of the time, October the 27th, 2001, I remember it very well, we moved to the Cayman Islands to look for a job. I managed to find a job about 2 days before they were about to kick me off the island as a bartender. They still kicked us off the island, which is when I first went to Jamaica, whilst we waited for our work visas to be approved. And then I bartended in the Cayman Islands for 2.5 years. I've always had a very unnatural obsession with all things communist. So I spent a month in Cuba whilst I was there, before our mutual friend Alistair Riddle. And Cuba's a very interesting place. You can literally do a hashtag only in Cuba. It's so fascinating. But this got me, further interested in stuff, and I wanted to travel more. I ended up working on cruise ships after that for 1 year, which again got me to tick off a hell of a lot of countries in the Caribbean and the Mediterranean. But I then decided I wanted more from my life than just bartending. So I ended up becoming a teacher in Xi'an, in China. And as I was in China, I thought that I should really go to North Korea. And when I started to research this, I found that all the companies, no names mentioned obviously, were all rather expensive. So I arranged the first trip through a company based in Hong Kong. I recruited 5 other teachers, and got an extremely cheap price. But I'd gone there with the idea of starting a company, and I kind of put some feelers out when I was in country, and ended up meeting my future North Korean business partner on this first trip. And then we got YPT started. My original name for the company was Joseon Tours. How boring is that?
Yeah, that definitely wouldn't, I think, attract the type of clientele that YPT has come to attract.
No, but I remember, I think I've still got it dusted away somewhere in a cupboard, but I had a notebook. Before I did my first trip to North Korea, I did a big trip on the Trans-Siberian Railway. One of the guys I met on the Trans-Siberian Railway ended up coming on the first North Korea trip. But I had this little notebook, and I was writing notes about Joseon Tours. And I was very much like, a year before I went to North Korea, I saw this gap in the market, and I started planning a website, and I started planning everything. I'm just very glad, as you know, that I ended up changing the name to what it is now.
Absolutely. And what was it about the North Korea? I mean, after you went there, I mean, obviously you saw the gap in the market, but what was, a year before you even went? So what happened when you went?
Well, I mean, okay, so when I was in the Cayman Islands, I was obsessed with going to Cuba, and I made that happen, and it was much like what you said about North Korea, seeing everything firsthand. Not all of it perfect, but certainly not the hellhole that American propaganda or whatever propaganda makes it out to be. And I saw a lot of positives there, and I got to make my own decision about the country. I then got to move to China, and at that point, North Korea, it's a lot more accessible now. We know that because of how many people we take there and everything. But back in 2008 or 2006, when I first started thinking about it, North Korea really was, the unexplored place. It was somewhere very few people went. I was living in China, so I just felt that I had to go. I had to go and see it for myself, see what was real, see what was fake. And much like yourself, much like lots of us in the industry, it had an extremely profound effect on me. I always say it was the best experience I've ever had, but also I always say it's almost a little bit of a disappointment because you get there and you see a hell of a lot of real life. People getting on buses, people wearing suits, going to work, going shopping. And you almost expect it to be so different, but it's you just see that people are people and life is life to an extent, regardless of the political situation.
And that is true. And I think that we've had conversations before to the effect of there's a very, very large percentage of what you hear about North Korea that just isn't true. But the
absolutely.
Percentage that is left that is true is still enough for it to be, shall we say, extremely interesting.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. But it's it's interesting too. I like to call it the North Korean state of mind because you travel there with a group of tourists, and a lot of them are great, but you always have the few in the group who in earnest think that everything that they're seeing is being done for their benefit. Everything's this kind of Truman Show experience. Every word that they're uttering is being recorded and or filmed. And
I've got the ultimate
it's just amusing.
one for you for that. I've got the ultimate one for that. We were at the DMZ, and there were birds chattering as they do, or it might have been cicadas. No, it was cicadas. Sorry, it was a loud noise of cicadas because it was the summertime, and a guy turned. And as a tour guide, you have to be extremely polite to people. But he turned to me and said, "Is that real?" And I was like, "What? What do you mean?" He's like, "The noise." I'm like, "The cicadas." And he said, "Yeah." And I was like, I was honestly speechless, which you know me well enough. Speechless isn't something that happens to me too much. And I just sort of stood there with my mouth open, and his friends called him a dipshit. And his nickname for the rest of the trip was Dipshit, which was not coined by me. And those are a couple of great guys. I actually still meet them when I go back to London. But he turned around and said, "Well, you never know with this place." I was like, "Dude, the cicadas are real."
That's true, and I guess you do never know with the place because there are I think it's at the Mansudae Art Studio. They do have the trees with the bird. There's speakers in the trees playing bird sounds. But I think that's the only place I ever experienced any sort of artificial animal life.
They're not trying to trick you with it. Do you know what I mean? It's
no, it's for effect. It's not to like make you think in earnest that there are birds in the trees.
It's like the amount of people that say that the rumor that the Pyongyang metro is fake, which again, shameless plug to your wonderful video on that answers the question if the Pyongyang metro is fake. Again, this gets us onto the whole Truman Show element of it would have to be to astronomical proportions to try and convince people that you've got a metro, an old metro with Eastern European cars.
Yeah, it's interesting that, and we since we've gone there, and we've gone to the shameless plug. If people want to see this video, it's called "Is the Pyongyang Metro Real or Fake?" You decide, and it's a lovely YouTube video with about 155,000 views on it. I think it would be more if the YouTube algorithms, didn't sort of push it away because it's not a Vice documentary on North Korea. But anyway, I digress. But yeah, that was actually my last trip to the DPRK. And I actually became, as far as I know, the first Western cameraman, or at least certainly the first American one, to ride through and film the majority of the Pyongyang Metro. And it's interesting you bring that up because people, I think the reason that YPT pushed the Korean partners to do this tour where you go through the whole, or the vast majority of the metro, was because you had all these people who would think that everybody in the metro were all actors and this was all some sort of big stage thing to impress a handful of tourists. And it's like, so what? And I lost my train of thought. Hang on.
No, absolutely. And I can sort of explain the rationale behind that.
Sorry. The point
sorry.
I was going to make though is it's interesting because in terms of the Koreans, they a lot of these things, like when people will ask, and a lot, this whole, and they think they've gone into this whole Truman Show thing. And then people ask, well, why can't we see another station? And while it is true that when you're on the tour, you do go to pre-approved places, so it's not that easy to change the itinerary. But there's also just the element of like, how would I feel if somebody showed up here and was like, I want you to bring me through the entirety of the New York MTA Transit Authority? Or how would you feel if somebody showed up and said, you know what, Gareth, you know what I'd like to do? We're in London. I'd like to ride through the entire tube system. So for the Korean perspective, they're just like, why do you want to see that?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's a common misconception about stuff. And it's like, they only show you the good things. It's like, there's not too many places where tour guides want to say, hey, look at the worst parts of my country. But again, back to the metro question, originally, you could only ride one stop. So that was where the myth came that it wasn't real. It was like, there's only these two stops. So then the Koreans changed it. Well, us and other companies pressured them to change it. So then we could ride 5 stops, and that was a big deal. And then in the end, we got it pushed so we could ride the entire metro. And again, you're absolutely correct. From the Korean point of view, they were a bit like, why the hell would you want to do that? Kind of thing,
Yeah, exactly. And but I will say, though, it is, in terms of metro systems, it is actually pretty interesting to go through and quite beautiful in a lot of respects. And just really eccentric and cool. Like, what is the, there's the Golden Harvest station, I think, where like the chandeliers are like grapes and all that. So it is actually really cool.
Well, I mean, again, to give it some context, and anyone that's ridden the Moscow Metro, there's a hell of a lot of similarities. And the Moscow Metro was obviously where the North Koreans got their influences from. So it's I could ride the Moscow Metro all day long just to look at these cool stations. So I can certainly understand why people would want to see all the different stations in Pyongyang. It's not, like I say, it is very different to seeing every station in London or in New York, where it's like, oh yeah, that's yep, there's Covent Garden, yep, there's Notting Hill, yep, they were great. But yeah, I could certainly understand why people would want to see every station for sure.
So what else?
Okay, so let's get back to you then, Justin, shall we?
Sure.
So you said about your best travel experience, but I want to ask you, and again, this is a tough one, forgetting kind of travel experience, but what's the best country you've been to? Like if you basically money, coronavirus, etc., were no option, you just want to get away. Just the coolest, fun place you've been to. And I wonder if we'll have the same answer or not.
I have to say that would probably be, and obviously there are a lot of islands in the South Pacific, and they're very similar in a lot of ways, but they're also different. They all have their own unique thing. And I would have to say Tuvalu in
me
the
too.
South Pacific.
What a coincidence. What a coincidence. So I know why I love Tuvalu. Now, okay, so let's get geeky now. Tuvalu is the third least visited country on Earth. So it's very, very off the beaten track. Not many people have been there. Why do you love Tuvalu? What's so good about it?
I mean, it's just something, like from the moment that you land there and you land on this runway that's in the center of the main island, Funafuti, and you land, and it's one of two international flights a week. And when you land there, you see that the local fire truck is parked out on the runway to make sure nobody runs out there. And then since it's sort of an air shuttle, I think the planes go like only half of the flight gets off, and then the rest of the people are going to another island or something. So the plane takes off again. And as soon as the plane takes off, the runway then becomes inhabited again by a bunch of people who live on the island and are using it for various things. Like people are playing soccer games, people are doing exercises there, and things like that. So right away, you understand that you're in a very interesting place. That said, it just has you have the mix of island life, but then also you have all of these really interesting, like World War II relics, Japanese cannons, American equipment, former like Japanese bunkers and things like that are just left over there. And what's interesting about it is, in a lot of places you'd see things like that and they would be marked off and preserved like a museum. But in these places, these things are so common that there's like kids playing on them, and it's just kind of not, nobody really cares. In terms of just the atmosphere on the island, obviously the most beautiful scenery that you can imagine. Just clear blue water. You can take a boat out to an uninhabited islet. Just like 20 minute boat ride, and spend the day out there, like cooking up fresh seafood and things like that. And then the people are just really nice. They're very friendly, but also just since it's it's our third least visited country in the world, they're just really interested in why have you come? But then once you sort of get past that, and they're just really friendly and fun to hang out with. Really fun to rent a moped and ride around the island. It really only takes you about 20 minutes to ride from one end to the other of the main island. But yeah, I don't know. It's just like a really relaxed, fun-loving, beautiful place.
Have you ever got into trouble with the police for speeding down the airport runway?
That wasn't me. I think that might have been you.
That was me. Yeah, that was definitely me. And I think Alice. It might have happened to Alistair as well. But
I think the closest I ever got into, closest I ever came to getting into trouble was, I think we were up late on one of the last nights with some of the packs, having a couple cocktails, as we do. And everybody wanted, we ran out of alcohol. And, these places are, things shut down, at 10 o'clock at the latest. Maybe a bar is open till 11. And I think I rode my motorbike back to the local bar, and the local bar is really funny. I forget the name of it, but it's run by a funny and nice Chinese woman. And you walk in, and there's like a whiteboard with all the the food. It says Funafuti, but then it also has the name of all the local islands. and it has the names of all the people from Funafuti and the surrounding islands who are banned from the bar. Do you remember that? I think we got your name on that.
We got my name
Gareth.
on the wall of shame. My name is on the wall of shame. It was one of my proudest moments.
But it wasn't enforced. But yeah, I think I showed up at like 11:05, and I'm badgering the woman who owns the bar. Please, just sell me a bottle of something or whatever. And she's saying, I'm not going to do it, but we've just had a party here, and I'm going to give you this box of free food. And they had all this like grilled chicken and hot dogs and sausages and stuff. And I'm like, that's great, but what about the bottle, whatever? And she finally basically said, you need to get out of here, or there's going to be trouble. And well, I returned with the food, and everybody, I think, was more or less satisfied with that.
I remember us being very satisfied indeed. So, as a world-traveled person, I think we're going to have a varied amount of listeners here. What advice would you give to somebody young and fearful about travel? I mean, a lot of people think it's extremely hard, or people say, "Oh, how do you just go and travel the world or whatever?" What advice would you give to, a 20, 21-year-old who's looking, or younger or older or whatever, who's looking to go and do a bit of adventure?
Well, I would say if you haven't done it before, and haven't, and you're a little nervous about going, and I don't want to make this necessarily a commercial for YPT, so I will say whether it's YPT or another travel company, although it should be YPT, yes. I would say that group travel is a great way to get into that, because you're going to be with like-minded people, other young people who are interested in the same things. I mean, if you're in a group of people going to North Korea, or you're with a group of people going to, visiting 12 different South Pacific island nations, or people who want to see breakaway republics like Transnistria or Abkhazia, the people that are going to be on that tour with you are bound to be interesting people in some respect. Maybe not all of them. If they're like a German person, they could be incredibly boring. But most of the people on there are going to be interesting in some respects. So I would say group travel is a great way to get into it. And then, you'll reach a point where you might be, comfortable just going to some places on your own. I mean, obviously, I've been to a lot of places with YPT, but I've also been places on my own, But without having done the YPT, I wouldn't have known that I could do something like go to Myanmar and spend 2 weeks there on my own. So that was a result of getting into it through doing the sort of group travel.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, as we, again, not to shamelessly plug again, but as we like to say, group tours for people that hate group tours.
Exactly.
So you brought up something interesting. So I'm going to go down a whole rabbit hole here that I think you're going to enjoy. So you mentioned Transnistria. So one, tell us a little bit. What is Transnistria? There's some people who are going to say trans the what?
And that's definitely up there on my list of travel experiences. I wouldn't say that it's like, going to an island paradise like Tuvalu.
It is not.
It is an island in a way. But yeah, so Transnistria is a breakaway rebel republic. It's officially, as far as the UN is concerned and the rest of the international community, it's officially part of Moldova. But it was an ethnically Russian region in Moldova. And when Moldova declared independence from the Soviet Union in the early 90s, the ethnic Russians who lived in Transnistria feared cultural exclusion at the hands of an independent Moldova. And there was a civil war. And Transnistria was essentially looking to become its own country. And it still seeks that international recognition today, although it is only recognized by other rebel republics and kind of supported by Russia. But the fascinating thing about it is that it's a complete Soviet time warp. And that was one of the interesting things. I mean, obviously, as we mentioned, we've kind of married some of what I do with film with what, YPT does. And I'd love to, you could without doing minimal, and I mean extremely minimal changes. I mean, you could film in Transnistria as if it were the Soviet Union in the 1970s.
Absolutely.
And it's like totally going back in time. And for that experience alone, it's fascinating. I don't know if I'd like to live there. Maybe, for like a couple months I could do, but
I spent a month living there, of course. I did spend
That's
a month
right.
living there. And I can understand why somebody wouldn't want to. So I'm going to move on to, again, carry on down this rabbit hole. So you have the Counting Countries Brigade, the 193 UN states people. So what counts as a country to you? So, for example, if you were doing the UN thing, they would count the Cayman Islands as you visiting the UK. Do you count Transnistria? Do you count the Cayman Islands in your list of 50 countries?
Yes, I would. And I mean, obviously, I think that the UN list should not necessarily be any sort of, that shouldn't be the be all end all. Because I mean, we all know that with a lot of those things in terms of recognizing countries, a lot of that is political. When the UN decides what can be a country and what can't be. So I would say that shouldn't necessarily, so it shouldn't stop at that list. So in terms of, I don't know, what makes a country, I would say crossing a border, having that international border, going through customs and having to, show your passport. And so I think in that respect, I mean, it's very much like, going into another country when you cross from Ukraine or Moldova into Transnistria. I think it 100% counts.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with you on that, of course. I mean, even you cross from France to Belgium, you don't even show a passport now. So have you been to any other unrecognised countries?
Good question. Have I?
Yes, you have. Yes, you have.
Yes,
You've been to partially recognised.
I have. Yep, I've been to the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, and I got to say, it's the best Cyprus.
Why is Northern Cyprus the best Cyprus? Did you do anything interesting whilst you were there?
Yes, I saw some wonderful Byzantine era castles. I believe you and I we had some kebabs. We went to a casino, and we didn't really do much gambling at the casino, but we went to a casino nonetheless, and we stayed at a lovely hotel resort with some other British people. But no, I will say I really did like Northern Cyprus because Southern Cyprus, being the officially recognized Cyprus, is obviously there's much more development there, and there's a lot more tourists, and it's more expensive. It's just more crowded. A lot of Russians walking around the beaches in Speedos, which there's nothing wrong with. Maybe that's your thing, but it wasn't necessarily my thing, at least that day. It was just really interesting. It's one of the other places in the world where there's a DMZ, where you pass between from the south to the north. And then you pass into the north, and obviously the Greek influence ends, the Turkish influence begins. And it's the same beautiful island, but because of the sanctions and because of Northern Cyprus being only a partially recognized state, it doesn't have as much infrastructure. I mean, it has adequate infrastructure, but it's not as developed. And a lot of the scenery is preserved, and it's less expensive. And I just liked it.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you on pretty much all points there. I would also like to add one little tidbit in that we were seeing the Russians in Speedos. We should give context. This was December. Now, whilst Cyprus it was still maybe 15, 16 degrees. I don't know how to translate that into American temperatures. I don't know, 70, 68, 70 or something. But yeah, it was far too cold for all that kind of business. So we've got your take on what counts as a country. What counts as visiting a country? I've heard lots of people have lots of different opinions with this. I've heard some people say they won't count it unless they've had a drink there, which good luck if you're going to Saudi Arabia, for example. Some people like to have had a poo. I've heard other different variations that I'd probably leave off the podcast for now. But what do you count as visiting a country?
Well, this
before
is
you can tick it off.
when we get on these topics. Of course, you and I are going to be kind of like this is going to be like a rubber stamp, interview here with some of these things. But we are going over these things for the first time for the podcast listeners, so will be new for some people. But I go with kind of what you and I have said that, and I will say you are the one. I believe it comes from a blog you wrote, but you had obviously a layover that doesn't count. As much as we'd love to have a layover in Frankfurt and say, I've been to Germany, you haven't been to Germany. It's not what happened. Yeah. Now, what I would prefer to do is obviously having gone and left the airport and stayed there for me to even if I just stayed a day or went out into the main city and had a beer and a cigarette or something. But if we're going to just get into technical terms, you have to clear customs, get the stamp. Even if you go outside the airport, have a cigarette, technically you've been to the country, you can count it. You might not feel good about it, but you can count that country.
So you have been to Greece is what you're saying.
That's exactly what I was saying. I was there in Greece with Greek men.
Yes, men from Greece, indeed.
Men from Greece. Men from Greece, yeah.
I remember many, many years ago taking a ferry from Estonia to Finland, jumping off the ferry, running to a bar, downing a beer and a tequila, and being back on the boat within 45 minutes. I ticked Finland off the list.
That
Finland
counts.
has now been visited. It counts. It absolutely counts. I thoroughly agree. So you must be you're somebody who flies a lot. Again, this is, like you say, a little bit of a rubber stamp one now. But there's a game I believe I introduced you to, and it's almost one I'm wary of letting other people know about it, because if too many people find out about this, it will kind of spoil the game. But do you want to explain flight chicken?
Yeah, flight chicken. So so I want to obviously say that that flight chicken is something that's very difficult to do when flying domestically in the U.S. Or places where people primarily speak English and can communicate with you in English and know that you speak English. So you can't really do it domestically. But when you're flying internationally, this is that becomes like the Wild West, because you're flying on foreign airline companies where the staff, you might not speak the same language as the staff, and they might say, "Oh, he's a foreigner. Let's let him get away with this." So that said, basically what you do is when they call boarding for your flight, let's say you're taking a red eye from Tirana, Albania, to Ljubljana, Slovenia. For example, yeah. So you've gone to the you've used your Amex to gain access to the lounge, and you've had a couple of rackies, as you do in Tirana, and
I'd
maybe you even had a
Baileys to that as well. Probably have some Baileys as well.
Yeah, you had a cheeky swig of the Baileys or a guzzle, and yes, when they call boarding, you wait until the very last second to get on that plane, because the idea is that if you might not have a great seat, and when you get on the plane, the flight might not be sold out, and you might be able just to give yourself an upgrade by sitting in a better seat if you're the last person on the plane. Worst case scenario, if you're not the very last, somebody comes and says, "That's my seat," and you go to the seat you were supposed to have. No offense, none taken. So sometimes you can give yourself an upgrade. Now, usually it just results in getting better seating in terms of being closer to the front of the plane so you can get off quicker when you land. Sometimes when you're really a pro, you can give yourself an upgrade to business class or economy plus. Again, very rare, but I learned this from you, so maybe you should add whatever you think is pertinent on flight chicken.
I would love to add on to this. I would say that probably, when it goes wrong, it goes wrong. I'll add that, but I would say probably 80% of the flights I've been on just aren't full, and probably 50% are getting on for half empty. I've managed a couple of premium economy upgrades that I was very, very proud of, and one semi-first class, but it was an Argentinian airline that didn't really offer all that much. But for me, like I love being on the aisle seat. I love being as close to the front as possible. And yeah, but it's you realise that I feel that I've invented the name of this game, but I didn't invent this game. There are some serious pros out there, and there's been me and more than one Chinese guy eyeballing each other to see who was going to go through first. And I've caved. I don't always win. I compete very, very well, but I don't always win. But yeah, I would absolutely agree. A great way to make that flight experience more fun.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true on the other players too, because it's funny when you introduced me to this. We had been traveling. We traveled, for those who don't know, and most people don't. We traveled together for like, I don't know what, it was like a month and a half or something in 2017 as we traveled we sort of shadowed YPT's Eurasia Adventure Tour, and we were taking meetings with various film production companies and movie studios and stuff about possibly bringing business to these places. And we mostly traveled by train or car. But then at a certain point in the trip, we were flying by. We started to fly. I think it was actually when we flew.
Funny enough, it was to Cyprus. Yeah, from Belgrade.
Yeah, from Belgrade to Cyprus. And you turned to me, and we've been traveling for like a month. We both stink. We're both like perpetually hungover. We've been in the Belgrade Smokers Lounge, which is, I think, possibly the most depressing smokers lounge like on the planet. That's actually a thing. We should start a thing. People should write in and tell us what they think is actually the most depressing, smokers lounge that exists. I saw one in Casablanca that was also pretty dreary, but that Belgrade one is.
I think New York, although it's not a smokers lounge, I remember being in New York and being forced to not only go out of the airport, but to basically go next to where dogs are allowed to shit. To smoke.
Yeah,
and I remember thinking,
still like that.
Wow, it's still like that. I remember that being one of the worst ones. And in Panama, they wouldn't let you smoke in the grounds of the airport. You had to, and it's a huge airport. So
that's interesting.
I'm a bit off on a tangent, but yeah, that was. I didn't like Panama. Again, I spent a day there. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be a bit demoralizing. Having to go with the dogs, with the piece of AstroTurf that the dogs poo on. But you turned to me as we were coming out of that smoking lounge, and you said you described flight chicken to me, and you said this is what we're gonna do, and I'm going, oh my god, can we just get on the flight? And you're like, no, seriously, just watch. And we're standing there, and sure enough, they're calling and they're saying this is the last call and everything. And you're like, there are some serious players out today. And you take a look around, and there are people you wouldn't expect. Yeah. There's like the Chinese guy, but then there's also like the 60-year-old like Serbian woman and some other like random people. And the system worked. We did get a flight upgrade that day.
Exactly.
I should say a seat, not a flight upgrade, a seat upgrade.
Seat upgrade, yeah. The system definitely worked. But yeah, so all you guys out there, we definitely suggest trying flight chicken. So a question I wanted to ask before, I'll get sort of back on track. So we've talked about, we've We've sugar coated everything. We've talked about best country, best experience. Now, whilst I sort of balk a little bit saying worst country, what's your worst travel experience?
Ooh, what is the worst travel experience?
Or if you struggle with that one, we could even go down the route of, or even we could do both. Is there a country you've been to that you don't need to go back to?
Yes. There is, and I would say that would be the least visited country in the world, Nauru. Now, that said, there are things that I do like about Nauru, and I'm really glad that I went, and there are some really interesting things about that country. But that said, in terms of islands in the South Pacific, it's not exactly the most beautiful. It's one island, and it's round, and it's how many kilometers is it around? 20 kilometers?
Yeah, something. I mean, you walk around it in 4 hours.
Yeah, it's 20 kilometers around. It's literally like an island fortress prison thing where, as people should know from the last couple of years from the international news, that's where Australia was sending any refugees from, like the Middle East or Africa, or et cetera, that ended up in Australia. They were sending them to Nauru because you can't get off. It's literally this one island, I think made of like volcanic rock. And it's surrounded by coral and jagged rock. And there's only like one area that you can swim. It rains a lot. There isn't really a lot to do. It was sort of formerly prosperous in like when they bought their phosphate mines back from the British in the 60s, and then the phosphate reserves dried up in the 80s. There's not really anything for anyone to do, no jobs, so everyone's kind of on a universal income. So, okay, yeah, you go and you spend 1 or 2 days in Nauru, that's fine. But the problem is the way that the international flights are set up, isn't it that you can spend 2 days or you can spend 5, right? Isn't
it's
it
pretty much
like
you
that?
you can spend a day and a half or 5.
Right. Yeah, you can spend a day and a half or 5. So naturally, when you're doing in a tour scenario, people want to stay more than a day and a half. So finding things to do on that 20-kilometer round island, it gets, by the end, you're ready to get out of there. So I will say that I will go back to Nauru, obviously, for that tour, but it would not be a place I would just elect to go to.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd add that, like you said, there's only one place to swim. It's got to be like the least lucky country on Earth, pretty much. Least lucky Pacific Island country in that they don't have a single beach. There's so much jagged rock and everything. Where if it was any other Pacific country, it would be able to utilize its position. But yeah, I would agree with you. I would certainly agree with you on that one.
Yeah, because Kiribati, for instance, which I would say is maybe a little poorer. It's kind of a little more like impoverished as you're just going around the island and stuff. But the scenery is beautiful and the people just seem happier. So in that sense, but Nauru kind of had this sort of dreary thing that hung over it,
Yeah. Yeah.
That said, people check it out, and everyone there was really nice. It wasn't like a bad experience. Oh my God, this is horrible. But yeah, it was just okay. It's time to go.
It's funny for me because this was the first New Year in 4 New Years that I didn't spend it in Nauru. So I was getting messages from people in Nauru, sort of, asking where, how I was. They obviously knew why I wasn't coming. But I don't know. It's kind of grown on me, Nauru. But yeah,
you do like it. I know you do like it.
Yeah, 4 bars in the whole country. That's not an ideal scenario. And every restaurant except for one is bad Chinese food. We should add that into the equation as well.
Bad Chinese food, but good sashimi. But I will say, with only 4 bars on the island, it is fun to do that pub crawl where you do go to all the bars in one country in one day.
Yes. So if you Google how to pub crawl a country in a day, I do believe we are number 1. Or certainly how to pub crawl Nauru. Okay, so you touched on before about some countries you've lived abroad. Where have you lived?
So I think sort of how we define and where we've lived is if you've lived there at least 2 months or so. So in that sense, I've lived in Dandong, China, and I've lived in Albania. And we haven't talked about this too much, and I think we're sort of approaching the point where we're running out of time. Yeah. But you and I both lived in Albania in summer 2019 when Pioneer Media, which by the way is the sort of media arm of YPT, which we founded together. We were doing all the production services and location services for the Fangoria remake of Castle Freak, which we ended up shooting at Gjirokastra Fortress down in southern Albania, mostly among other locations. But we lived there, and I must say that was actually I loved living in China and Dandong, obviously, for the reasons that I gave. But in terms of like just living in a place outside of America and being an expat somewhere, I mean, Albania, I just thought was just a wonderful place to live. Now, it has its challenges in terms of doing business. But if you're just like, living there and just hanging out, I mean, it's absolutely wonderful. The food's great. The people are really nice. They have a really interesting culture and history that spans thousands of years. So it was awesome in that sense. Then, of course, we started making the movie, which was a little stressful, but obviously the ends justified the means.
Yeah. So again, I'll kind of I'll finish up then with what advice would you give to somebody that wants to go and live abroad? It's one of those things that it seems to be everyone's dream, but so many people are so fearful of it. How do you just move abroad? How do you just move to Albania? How does somebody do that?
Well, I mean, we were lucky in that sense that we did have a job to do. So, and we were able to, we were fortunate there. But, one thing I will say, and one way that COVID, when we come out of this, the other side, one way that COVID may have changed the world for the better is that we now have a lot of empty office space. And I mean that as a good thing only in the sense that we've figured out that a lot of people could be productive from whether they're at home or wherever they are. So a lot of people now, I think, have been moved almost permanently to remote working, which would make doing something like living abroad or living in Albania or wherever, or Tuvalu, much easier. So that would be my advice. And my advice would be to just do it, especially while you're young, before you have a lot of obligations, like wives, kids, real lives, unless that's your lifestyle, such as like if you're Gareth Johnson.
Yes, not surely the fictional character that is Gareth Johnson. Okay,
yes, exactly. So, the mythical travel creature that is Gareth.
The
Johnson,
mythical travel creature. Okay, so well, I'd like to thank you, Justin, for taking the time to speak to me today. At some point, I will be using this time to thank our Patreons, but that's something to follow in the future. But I'll let you finish off. I hear you've written a book, amongst other things. Would you like to give one last shameless plug about something whilst you have people listening?
Sure. So aside from all this North Korea stuff and the films, it's no secret that I have an obsession with 60s ukulele player and falsetto singing entertainer Tiny Tim. And I wrote his official biography called Eternal Troubadour, The Improbable Life of Tiny Tim. It was actually just turned into a documentary film, which was narrated by Mr. Weird Al Yankovic. And we're in talks right now to do a feature film, so that should be pretty cool. And that's my shameless plug. Thank you very much for having me on and for all the travel experiences. I look forward to many more once we come out of this whole COVID thing. And I want to say also thank you to Seeger Dixon, the engineer of this podcast.
Wonderful. And last but not least, what do you think of people in hostels with a ukulele?
Oh God, it's like you packed for your trip. You're like, oh man, I'm like a backpacker. I'm gonna like go backpacking through Eastern Europe. I'm gonna be staying at all these hostels. I'm gonna be doing it with all these chicks. All this stuff. I'm gonna pack one backpack that has like 2 pairs of underwear, like a pair of pants, a pair of shorts, like 2 shirts, and I'll wash them as I go along. But you know what? I just have to lug around with me through this entire trip is this ukulele that I bought at the local, music store. I know 3 chords, and you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go and sit down in the lobby in the hostel and just strum those 3 chords, not play a song. I'm just going to strum these 3 chords, and, maybe some chick will want to lay me. So, yeah, I love those guys who do that.
I think they rarely get laid. Okay, so a huge thank you for Justin. Thank you to Justin. And this is the end of your Pioneer podcast. We've got a big lineup of exciting people that we'll be announcing across a number of fields, from politics to sports and everything in between, but all with excellent and interesting travel stories. So until the next time, this is Gareth, and this has been the Pioneer Podcast.
Yeah.